to all the participants and all the people attending the session. We are about to start a session on role of national financing vehicle in mobilizing climate finance, and to have a look at GCF's private sector approach in supporting global climate finance agenda. The agenda for the session is we start with a welcome remark from His Excellency Ban Ki-moon, GDGI's President of the Assembly and Chair of the Council, followed by presentations from Mongolia, where we would be talking about Mongolia Green Finance Corporation, the experience, status update, and learnings. The second speaker is from GCF, where we would be looking at private sector approaches of Green Climate Fund, followed by a presentation on GDKP, looking at building the financial architecture for sustainable economic transitions, and then looking at linking ESG investments to green and climate finance via a national financing vehicle. We'd open the floor for discussions, question and answers after that, and then followed up by session summary and closing remark. Without further ado, I think we'd start with a video. Over to you.
Excellencies, distinguished participants and guests, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to welcome all of you to this year's Global Green Growth Week, organized by the Global Green Growth Institute. Your participation is evidence that we, the global community, demand climate action, and I want to thank you for doing your part to drive and empower green growth. The climate crisis is perhaps the defining crisis of our times. Every year, we can read and hear more and more about the devastating impacts of extreme weather systems, and this year is proving to be one of the worst years yet, with the record floods, the droughts, and the heat waves, all of which lead to displacements from homes, food crises, and wildfires that disrupt and destroy the lives of millions. We are destroying our hope for a better future, and we need to work together to save our planet. I'm pleased to know that so many of you are coming together to exchange ideas, solutions, and best practices on how to advance the implementation of the Paris Climate Change Agreement, the framework which I helped establish during my time as the Secretary General of the United Nations. I'm especially pleased to know that many of you are joining from all corners of the world, including Africa, Asia, Latin America, the Middle East, and the Pacific, and many of the solutions to be discussed are coming from women and indigenous communities who are most affected by climate change. I encourage you to take full advantage of Global Green Growth Week and engage with one another as green growth champions and practitioners. The climate crisis will require collaboration and collective action from each and every one of us, because climate change knows no borders, and climate change does not discriminate based on race or social class. We can transform our economies and societies and leave a better future, a sustainable and inclusive future, only if we work together. The challenges will be difficult and there are no shortcuts, but if we work together urgently, I think we can do it. As I have said before, there is no plan B because there is no planet B either. I hope you will join me to make the world a better place for future generations. I wish you very fruitful and successful events during Global Green Growth Week. Thank you.
Gratitude to His Excellency Ban Ki-moon for the welcome remark. We start with a round of presentations. The first presenter today we have is Tuguldur Bavai. I'm going to go through a quick round of introduction for him. He serves as a Green Investment Officer at the GDGI and supports the development of investment projects, business cases, financial models, specialized financing vehicle concepts, and project proposals. He worked in project development of a national financing vehicle, as well as for several energy efficiency projects in Mongolia. Prior to joining GDGI, he worked for public, private sector, as well as international organizations, and gained experience in fiscal and financial management, securitization, investment mobilization, green finance, program and project development and management. His session today will focus on what it takes to develop national financing vehicles, with an example of MGFC, which is Mongolia Green Finance Corporation as an example, and share learnings of do's and don'ts and the status of MGFC. Without further ado, the floor is yours, Mr. Tuguldur Bavai.
Good morning, all. Thank you, Gulshan. I'll start with my presentation, which introduced by Gulshan. So I'll share my screen. Just to confirm, can you see my shared screen?
Yes, we can.
Thank you. So today's presentation is about national financing vehicle, and we'll talk about Mongolia Green Finance Corporation, a Mongolian version of national financing vehicle, and I also would like to share some of common considerations and reasons why a national financing vehicle can be instrumental in mobilizing climate finance, and what would be considerations if you or someone decides to consider establishment and development of the national financing vehicle in certain countries. So the content of I'll try to answer two simple questions: why, which is a rationale for national financing vehicle, what were the key considerations for Mongolia case, and how, which is what we did, what were the key considerations and recommendations during the establishment and during this long journey of us. And third, I'll make a short update on the current status of the Mongolia Green Finance Corporation, progress to date. And lastly, I would like to share some lessons learned in our journey to the establishment of the Mongolian Green Finance Corporation. So throughout the presentation, I might interchangeably use Mongolia Green Finance Corporation, MGFC, and National Financing Vehicle interchangeably, just because there are similarities, and I think many of the features are relevant to other countries and overall to national financing vehicle. So before I start with the why, what would be the rationale for the national financing vehicle, I would like to bring an attention to some of the features, what's happening, circumstances in the climate finance. And to this end, I would like to bring a note on this latest McKinsey report, which basically asks and investigates what would it cost us if we are serious and if we will be achieving the climate targets set by 2030 and 2050. And I like this conclusion that it refers to 6 characteristics that our journey towards the net zero transition would require for us, and it's probably a good background why national financing vehicle is important for developing countries. The first feature I would like to discuss is that it will be universal. So basically, the shift would be relevant to all sectors, so including from power sector to waste management, including all sectors. Number two, it will be significant in terms of the investment magnitude. About $9.2 trillion US dollar investment per annum we need in the next 30 years. And luckily, many of part of it is like a commercial investment that will make up, I mean, on a commercial basis. And third, which is also very important for us, is that it will be front-loaded. The more we can mobilize today, the less required at a later date. So the front-loaded nature is something that we had to deal with, and we think the national financing vehicle is also very relevant on this part. And fourth, uneven. So those developing regions that have carbon fossil fuel rich regions, those will be exposed most in this transition. So the geographies, the countries will be affected differently. And fifth, it will be not without the risks, because there will be risk associated with the energy security, energy stability, price, and some of the assets would probably go throughout the impairment. Some of them will be abandoned, some of them will be built new. And sixth is important, is that it will be rich in opportunities. So every sector will undergo various transitions, and over 200 million jobs will be lost, and probably almost 300 million new green jobs will be created. So it will be rich in opportunities in many ways. And another point I would like to make here is that before we talk about the rationale for national financing vehicle, we also talk about what are the challenges and barriers today. So the first barrier I would like to mention and known well is that the financing gap. And the financing gap for the climate financing remains huge, and it needs to be really closed as soon as possible with all various instruments. And second fact is that we increasingly notice certain mismatch. So while there are, in physical terms, increases in the climate finance and climate investment, there are mismatches, and the requirements for those investments are high, and we increasingly notice and see the mismatch between the local capacity in the developing countries, especially in those places that the investment are much needed, and we need to close this mismatch as well. And third is that we all know that public funds are not sufficient for covering all this investment, and there is an urgent need for mobilizing private sector resources, not only in monetary terms, but also human resources, know-how, infrastructure, in all means. And fourth is that all these challenges are increasingly showing us that the traditional way is not sufficient to reach the commitments. So we need a certain innovation in all aspects. So innovation, I like to mention this. GCF CEO Yannick mentioned that LLC was the innovation of the 20th century, where it was instrumental in mobilizing investment towards the private sector. Towards the industrialization process. And similarly, we need a certain similar innovation that really triggers investment and towards the climate change and climate aware investments. And those are current circumstances that we need to overcome. And this is where we start with the climate national financing vehicle. So national financing vehicles can play a particular important role in emerging economies such as Mongolia, because national financing vehicle, green investment, green financial institutions can play a cornerstone investor, and they can provide confidence and reassurance to help private sectors to get comfortable with new markets and technology. And they also provide serve as a institutional instrument to overcome this timing mismatch or asset liability mismatch that is faced in many developing countries. While green investments require longer term recovery, often the financial sector is not really fit to this need. So a national financing vehicle can be instrumental on this. So when we ask a question, why national financing vehicle? What do we need it? We usually ask a question, what would happen if the country doesn't have the national financing vehicle? And we start with the analysis and the questions whether a green finance institution could be strategically useful or even necessary at all in a country. And second, we ask how best to design the mandated role and operating principles of the green institution so that it efficiently can address the market and market gaps in the market. We asked a similar question in Mongolia, and Mongolian stakeholders basically all agreed and come to a common conclusion that Mongolia Green Finance Corporation as a national financing vehicle is in line with the global trends, which is increasingly economic growth is decoupled from the carbon emissions. And second, it is aligned with the local conditions. So in particular, air pollution, energy efficiency, renewable energy. Those are, really relevant for Mongolia, but we have such a small financial market, and there is a systemic shortage of the capital. And the capital market is also not well developed, and that's why a deploying capital function is very important for us. And secondly, national financing vehicle and the Mongolia Green Finance Corporation is not only about financial. Yes, it is a pure financial institution, but its role can be beyond only deploying capital, and it will be very instrumental for us to building a capacity and setting a market behavior. Ultimately, we would like to understand, we agreed that, in order to overcome or achieve those climate targets, we need to join forces, public, private, and if possible, international resources. So there is a need to join forces, and also ultimately what we would like to achieve is that we would like to have a healthy demand for educated choices of the industries and the citizen for making an investment going forward. And all those together will be helpful for us to achieve our climate targets and grow economic in the future. So when I'll move to the part where what would what were the key considerations for Mongolia Green Finance Corporation in designing a structure of it. And first thing was that suitability to the context, which is there is no way, no single way of the structuring national financing vehicle in all countries. And the best way is that it needs to suit the needs of the country. And second would be the clarity of the role. So from the beginning, the stakeholders need to be clear in terms of what would be the main role and of the national financing vehicle in the country. And also, third is the independence. So ultimately, we would like to mobilize investments and hopefully from the international and local markets. And without an independence, a financial institution, it will be difficult to convince the investors. So independence is key of the national financing vehicle and the Mongolian Green Finance Corporation. And additionality. So additionality is also key when it comes to national financing vehicle. So it's about achieving a new outputs and outcomes that would have been not achieved without as an institution. And risk mitigation, obviously, we would like to really serve as an institution that mitigates the risk for the investors, especially for green investments. And those are the key principles for designing a Mongolia Green Finance Corporation for us. And mandate and functions of the national financing vehicle. So it's about being green. So being green means having a green investment as its core mission. So the best way of achieving certain results is that we have a interest intersecting in the core interest of the institution. And second is be additional. So basically focusing on filling the gaps in the financial system. Third, we wanted to be ambitious. We wanted to be not limited to certain economic sectors. We wanted to be more ambitious and try to reach economic sectors which are permitted and can have potential for the climate change. And we wanted to be really flexible. Initial products and the instruments of the Mongolia Green Finance Corporation are set up, but we would like to maintain the certain flexibility that really fits to the market needs.
Yes. Sorry to interrupt you. Last 3 minutes for your presentation, please.
Good. Okay. So given time limits, I'll move directly to the updates. What are the current status of the Mongolia Green Finance Corporation? First of all, the process started actually in 2017. It was a long journey. So in 2020 November, Mongolia Green Finance Corporation funding proposal, it was approved by the GCF. The project is about approved for a $50 million US, of which 15 million is in equity investment and 33 million of concessional loan investment and 2 million grants. And currently, the Mongolia Green Finance Corporation is established, and we have commitments from the private sector investment of $5 million US. Also, a commitment from the GCF is secured. Currently, Mongolian Development Bank of Mongolia is doing a due diligence for the investment and the provision of the soft loan to the MGFC. So this is the latest status of the Mongolia Green Finance Corporation. And I would like to finish with this presentation with the lessons learned that probably would be relevant if there are projects and considerations for the national financing vehicle. I guess the most important part is that the local ownership and leadership is really key, because in our long 5-year journey, without the local ownership and leadership, it could be lost in at any point. And business model should be really conducive to local circumstances and designed to crowd in local private investment. That's, I guess, the key in attracting the investors. And fourth important part was that we need to keep the simplicity, flexibility, to allow to fit the circumstances. And in our case, it changed several times. We've seen probably four different cabinets changed for us, not the ministers. And fifth is, the simpler the model, the more robust it is. So I guess those are the key lessons for us, and that are relevant for the national financing vehicle going forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Bavai. This is a very insightful presentation. We definitely learned a lot about what is MGFC and how you set up and the key principles. We come back to some key summaries at the end of the session. We go to the second presentation now. This is led by Ms. Jenta Konsi, Evaluation Specialist at the GCF. Jenta has more than 16 years of international experience monitoring and evaluating development sectors across UN agencies, governments, donors, and private organizations. Prior to the IEU GCF, she worked as an evaluation specialist with the UNDP's Independent Evaluation Office, where she conducted independent country program evaluations, supported thematic evaluations of UNDP, interagency pooled financing, and operation services corporate evaluation. Before that, she worked at the UNEP Evaluation Office in Kenya, conducting project-level GCF evaluations and supporting evaluation functions in UNEP. Jenta also worked in different monitoring functions and advisory roles with UN agencies in Afghanistan, Indonesia, and Timor-Leste. In this session, we will look at the private sector facility set up by GCF in order to scale up GCF's activities and de-risk the delivery of capital flows. GCF has set up a private sector facility, a dedicated division designed to fund and mobilize private sector actors, including institutional investors, project sponsors, and financial institutions. GCF will share about the performance and learnings of PSF till date. Over to you, Jenta.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Gulshan, for the presentation and for this event, obviously, and for having me here today. It's a pleasure to be here today and to contribute to this important conversation. So today I will present some of the lessons / conclusions and findings from the independent evaluation of the Green Climate Fund approach to private sector. Let me very briefly present what the evaluation. So we conducted a theory-based evaluation, a combination of mixed methods, qualitative and quantitative, and a variety of wide range of sources, obviously. And also, I would like to mention that we had 6 country case studies as well included into the sources that we consulted for this evaluation. So the evaluation was concluded in 2020, but presented to the GCF board in 2021. As you probably know, our office, the Independent Evaluation Unit, reports directly to the board. So we are independent from the management structure of the Secretariat, and we help the board to make informed decisions about the GCF investment. Next slide, please. Just wanted to also a bit of a disclaimer here. As I mentioned, the evaluation was conducted in 2020. So there is a lot of work going on within the private sector facility in GCF. The private sector strategy is also in full operations, as well as other processes that GCF is undertaking to facilitate the access to GCF. So some of these findings, you have to think about the timeliness. Some of this might not be fully up to date in light of these changes that GCF is undergoing. Next slide, please. So I would talk very briefly about some of the key conclusions or lessons. We might call also some of them are in the format of a lesson, as well as that we found in the work of GCF with private sector. While we saw that there is quite some work done in channeling new finance to developing countries through the private sector, but we found that this work is mainly focused on leveraging at the individual project level rather than catalyzing private finance. And here we make an important finding on the role of GCF, which is not very clear, especially in the strategic plan. Well, GCF, when it's not clearly stipulated where the GCF intends to be a mobilizing fund or a catalytic one. And of course, this has implications for the private sector engagement. The second area that we would like to present is about country ownership. We found that the work in project origination is primarily related to private sector, obviously, is primarily driven by international accredited entities, which have limited country ownership. And it is very clear in the GCF mandate, the country ownership, and this needs to be much more integrated into the work of the private sector. We also found that the private sector facility has a limited engagement with the national government, and the portfolio overall is not driven by country ownership, especially also the multi-country projects have a very limited country ownership in this regard. Another finding is around the balance of the portfolio, the GCF portfolio. We found that it is mostly focused on mitigation and has little investment on adaptation activities. Very little has been invested to indirectly finance private sector projects, and at the same time, that will require supporting an enabling environment, which would include policy and regulatory reforms, technical capacity building, and especially for readiness. We found that is delivered with very limited targeting and consultations with the private sector. Next slide, please. Another area is access to private sector, and it's an important one, obviously, because we have found that several private direct access entities that have been accredited, they have not had any funding flowing through them at the time of the evaluation. So we found that the private sector then has not been able to deliver on its mandate to promote the participation of local private actor and financial intermediaries. Especially the limit effectiveness of participation of local private sector in such as MSMEs and in vulnerable and poor countries such as SIDS and LDCs. Also here, an important point I wanted to make is around the efficiency and the effectiveness of the processing times in GCF, which are still perceived and are also evidenced to be quite slow. At the time of the evaluation, it took an average of 750 days to get accredited, and also for projects to get approved from submission to the board approval, it took around 220 days, and then more probably will follow in terms of the negotiations, so more days are also need to be factored in there as well. So it is clearly not a suitable timeline for the private sector mentality, culture, and structure. And the last area is about focus on vulnerable countries. I kind of mentioned this a bit earlier as well in other areas. It is important that the private sector support of GCF is focused on SIDS and LDCs, and also directly financing mitigation projects. So we are seeing mostly mitigation project and very little funding on adaptation activities. A key challenge here is for financing adaptation projects, we found that it is difficult to show how they can be profitable, and at the same time, GCF had limited results in investing in enabling environment for private sector in adaptation. So yeah, these were kind of the areas that we found there were some important findings and lessons to share with you. Now let's move on to the recommendations. Thank you. Oh, clearly, of course, these recommendations are linked to the areas that were discussed earlier. One key recommendation here is for GCF to clarify that GCF is a high-risk fund that aims to catalyze investment in a transformative adaptation and mitigation project, rather than only a high-leverage fund that aims to maximize the quantity of investment. We found that this lack of clarity in the strategic document of GCF is important to be made. And also, as I said, this has consequences for the way GCF works with the private sector. The second recommendation relates to enhance the transparency of GCF operations for efficiency and predictability. So it's important here to also, as I said, to really move fastward in aligning GCF operations with the private sector needs as well, especially in relation to efficiency and predictability. It's important that there is further streamlining of the accreditation and project approval processes, as well as more work in terms of tailoring the readiness program to the private sector. So it is important that these processes, as I said, are being streamlined, enhanced, and improved. The third recommendation is around ensuring that private sector are country-owned. So this country ownership is very important and need to be central to the work of GCF. Access to GCF should be informed by a country-driven approach, directed and prioritized by the NDC gap analysis. So we found that it's very important that GCF works with the country planning, also prioritize within the country planning what are the needs for the private sector and the projects that are more suitable. Also to take measures to assure that the private sector projects are country-owned, and a number of measures need to take place. Next slide, please. The fourth recommendation is around GCF itself, the structures and the organizational arrangements within the GCF. We found that GCF needs to create an institutional and organizational structures that can operationalize the finance for private sector activities. And here it's important to have a clear division, of responsibilities between different units that are providing technical support to private sector, as well as have sufficient funding and resources for working in the enabling environment for private sector adaptation and mitigation activities. The next recommendation also touches on the strategic priority to channel finance to small and medium enterprises and exploring access modalities and the appropriate instruments to do so. So setting up strategic priorities for GCF to channeling finance to small and medium enterprises is very important, as well as to explore access modalities and the appropriate instruments, as well as target and effective readiness support. And the last recommendation speaks about the expansion of financial instruments and the GCF support to enable a private sector investment in adaptation, and particularly in vulnerable countries, SIDS and LDCs. So again, here we are recommending GCF to expand the focus of financial instruments, and especially to enable private sector investment in adaptation, especially in the poor countries, and to consider financial innovations. And the financial innovations that are being considered need to be strictly tailored to the needs and the country context. And this brings the end to my presentation. I don't know if I have any more time, Gulshan. Is it right on time, or? I can
you can have another 2 or 3 minutes if you have any additional comments to make.
Yes, definitely. I think the other point I wanted to make is that our office, the Independent Evaluation Unit, is also conducting the second performance review of GCF, looking at the whole portfolio of GCF investment. Of course, the private sector facility is as an important part of it that we are looking and trying to assess its performance after this private sector evaluation. So what we have found so far is some of the emerging findings in that evaluation, again, talks about the need for the GCF clear and unique mandate to promote the participation of private sector partners, and catalyzing the private climate finance is still very important, need to be central for GCF work. So while we're seeing some progress, we're also noting that some long-term goals need to be fully aligned. Another important, or I say emerging finding, was that it is not very clear yet whether the GCF operating model is currently well positioned to support the private sector partnership. And also, while there is some effort to match the GCF program and cycle more directly with private sector investment opportunities, these have been still slow steps, and there's still some more to be done there, and to really have a more clear route from private sector investments to the GCF programming. So these are some of the things I wanted to share with you today. Thank you very much for your attention, and I hand over to you, Gulshan.
Thank you so much, Jenta, for sharing with us your conclusions, understandings, learnings, and also the recommendations for GCF on making more effective, efficient operations for the private sector. We would come back with some summary notes that I have probably at the end of the session, key takeaways from your presentation. We go ahead to the third presentation, which is led by Ms. Camille Andre. She's a Green Finance Manager at the Green Growth Knowledge Platform, and she'll be presenting about building the financial architecture for sustainable economic transitions. Camille leads the work of the Green Finance Platform at the Green Growth Knowledge Partnership, GDKP, in building, developing, and implementing the strategy, partnerships, and the projects. She manages the GCF-funded project on aligning finance policies, the Green Finance Measures database, the Sustainable Finance Policy Effectiveness Project, and coordinates the knowledge management and stakeholder engagement strategies. She's also a member of the GDKP Gender Expert Group. In addition, she is teaching sustainable and responsible investing at the EPF School of Engineering in Paris. Prior to joining the GDKP, Camille worked in an infrastructure investment fund on the integration of ESG risks in long-term portfolio and on de-risking strategies for financing the transition to sustainable economy. Her area of expertise is in the global political economy of sustainable finance policies and the implications for institutional dynamics and for driving positive impact in the real economy. Camille, a French citizen, holds a master's degree in international economic law from the Sorbonne Law School. Over to you, Camille, for your presentation. Are you able to share your screen, Camille?
Yes, so I will be sharing my screen now. And hi, Gershon, and thank you very much for the invitation.
It's a pleasure.
You as well. Just give me 1 second.
Sure.
Okay, so I'll start, and I suppose you can see my screen now. So thanks again for the invitation, Gershon, to speak. So I'm going to move a bit from talking about transaction and what we heard at a very good presentation from the GCF, and talk about financial policy, because it's the main activity and objective we're doing under the Green Finance platform. So I'm Camille. Thanks very much for the very good introduction. And what I'm going to present here is all the tools that we have under the Green Finance platform to do some technical assistance for finance and policymakers, and to try to work on the enabling environment. So just before the transaction, just before we go into concessional finance and finance mechanism, we are trying to work on technical assistance for financial policymakers.
Camille, sorry to interrupt you. While we hear you very clearly, we are unable to see your screen. I mean, the presentation is probably loading. Do you want to make sure that it's up there?
Okay, so it says that my screen is okay.
Yeah.
Is it better now?
No, it's still not loaded.
Okay, apologize.
No worries. You want to try once again? Maybe just sharing your screen once again.
Yeah. Okay, can you see it now?
Not yet. We're waiting. Okay. Given the technical glitch, Camille, is it okay if you would like to share your presentation with us, and then we can load it from here?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. While we do that, I think we can see your screen now. You just want to make it screen. Hopefully that will work.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Gayan. If you can put full screen, it would be wonderful, so that I can go ahead. Yeah, so the Green Finance platform, it provides a clearinghouse of market, of policy, but also of regulatory innovations for the financial system to contribute to the transition towards a low carbon, a resilient and inclusive economy. So we're working at enabling environment, but also on green, but also on sustainable finance. So on the next slide.
Camille. Right. Okay. Yeah. You want to make it full screen, please? The screen. We can see your slide, but it's just.
Yeah, that's my colleague Gayan is actually managing the presentation now. So if you can, Gayan, just try to make it full screen. Click on the presentation button at the below.
Another option is we can wait for the presentation to load. Why don't we do this? You can send us a presentation. We go with the next presenter first, and then we come back to your presentation after this one, just in the wake of time, and to be more efficient with the flow. Yeah.
Yeah, that's perfect.
Right. So we will be going to the next presentation first, and then we come back to you send us a presentation, and we'll upload it from here for you. Yeah.
Yeah.
So We move on to the fourth presentation, given the technical glitch on the third one. We have a presenter, Dr. Ick Jin. He's from the National Assembly Budget Office, Republic of Korea. He's the Director of Economic Analysis Coordination Division. He is currently leading the work on financial analysis on the effect of public expenditures and economic programs for the government of Korea. Before joining NABO, which is National Assembly Budget Office, he worked at the Korea Insurance Research Institutes, Korea Capital Market Research Institute, and the Bank of Korea. Dr. Jin holds a PhD from Rice University at Houston, a CFA designation, and a CIPM designation. His primary research interest includes ESG investing, sustainable development, climate finance, and climate technology. Dr. Jin has authored academic papers and policy reports, including analysis of the impact of achieving indices on public climate finance. Is ESG a systematic risk factor for US equity mutual funds, and many others. Without further ado, Dr. Jin, the floor is yours for your presentation today on linking ESG investments to green and climate finance via national financing vehicle. Over to you.
Mr. Vice, thank you for the introduction, and thank GGGI for giving me this opportunity to discuss the role of NFP today. I'm the Director General of the Economic Analysis Department at the National Assembly Budget Office. NABO is a non-partisan parliamentary supporting agency. We try to provide value-neutral information so that the National Assembly can make informed decisions. Today, I would like to address the following tripod for scaling up climate finance. Korea submitted the reinforced NDC last year, but the realized path so far has been above the target path. As the Korean National Finance Vehicle was established this year, regarding the theme of this session, I will briefly touch on the spending and revenue plan of the fund. Last, the sustainability of the fund depends on whether we secure the necessary financial resources. So let's look at the potentials and prerequisites of streaming private ESG investment to public climate finance. We believe that responding to climate change is one of the most important national policy agendas. Reflecting this view, Korea raised the NDC target to reduce national emissions aggressively. The target is 40% reduction compared to 2018 peak by 2030. The Korean government has exemplified the linear reduction path, which is the 4.1% annual reduction for 12 years next, from 2018 to 2030. We aim to achieve this goal by lowering carbon intensity and energy intensity while sustaining economic growth. However, there exist various views regarding this urgency, direction, and the speed of the response. Referring to the economic outlook, considerable disagreements may be raised about the appropriateness and validity of the target. The provisional emissions last year were about 680 million tons. It is a 3.5% increase from the previous year. The increase is mainly due to the economic recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic. The growth rate is lower than the global average, and the emission level is 6.5% lower than the previous peak. According to the NABO's forecast, the national emissions are expected to increase 0.4% this year, It is because the emissions in energy sector is expected to increase. For the next year, the emissions are expected to decrease 1.8%. It is based on the assumption that the policy implementations, such as an increasing the low carbon energy supply, would be effective. There are many upward factors and downward factors, so the realization may be deviate from the forecast. And the gap from the linear reduction path may remain over years. Under this circumstance, the Korean government is introducing various policies to form a significant decline trend. A part of such efforts is to establish a Korean national finance vehicle. It is called the Climate Response Fund. Article 70 of the Framework on Carbon Neutrality stipulates that the fund can spend on 11 purposes, including reduction and low carbon ecosystems, fair transition, institutional foundations, etc. The fund's budget for next year, it is currently under parliamentary deliberation now, is about 2.5 trillion won. Now let's look at the spending plan of the fund. Fund management plan. The fund operates under a double layer structure. The Ministry of Strategy and Finance manages the general affairs and planning the spending and the revenues, but the actual spending is implemented by 30 ministries, including the Ministry of Industry and the Ministry of Environment. According to the spending plan for next year, there has been no significant change from the past year. Look at this chart. The horizontal line represents this year's spending plan. The vertical line for the next year's spending plan. The dotted line is the 45-degree line. So this point means the expected spending is increasing. Is expected to increase next year compared to this year. As you see in this chart, the emission reduction is the largest spending portion, followed by low carbon ecosystems and institutional foundation, fair transition, and etc. Notable thing is that the fund plans to start international reduction projects based on Article 35 of the Framework Act. Those projects would utilize the cooperative approach stipulated in Article 6.2 of the Paris Agreement. The selection of counterpart countries and the negotiations for joint projects are expected to start this year. Now move on to the revenue plan of the fund. Article 69 of the Framework Act lists 9 types of revenues. According to the fund management plan for next year, the largest portion is from the transfer from the general account. The next is the sales of KAU, then transfers from other special accounts and funds. Compared to the last year, we observe the reduction, the decrease in the sales of KAU, and the decline is compensated by the transfers from other accounts. A matter to be discussed in the National Assembly budget review process is that the size of the transfers from general accounts exceeds the upper limit set by the Framework Act. It implies that it would be difficult to maintain this type of resources unless national policy priorities are premised. So the revenue of the fund relies on public finance resources now. The critical task is to design the safety net for the climate finance ecosystem. Today, I want to emphasize the classification of risk types and the multiple layer structure of risk management. We may think of a structure to let private investors handle the individual risk of climate projects and manage the systematic risk through PPP combined with ESG investing. Then make the NFP cope with the catastrophic risk as the last resort. Based on this structure, we can utilize a risk-sharing scheme to induce various private ESG investors. The structure may apply to PPP for ITMO projects. It may be necessary to employ comprehensive financial instruments, combining grants, loans, equities, and derivatives. Once private ESG investments are connected, the growth of climate finance could be accelerated dramatically. Here are some potentials of ESG investing and relevant empirical evidence from my recent research. At the bottom line, institutional investors dominate in the ESG investment now, and they are willing to embrace climate finance. But they are interested in systematic risk, not individual risk. And the climate risk is apparently such a risk. Then the institutional investors have strategically utilized negative screening for ESG investing, and we expect they are gonna use it for climate finance too. Institutional investors would prefer the cost-effective vehicle of ESG investing. It implies NFV should and could provide such vehicles. Last, the institutional investors are willing to manage systematic ESG risk based on the modern portfolio theory, and NFV could meet such a need. Both climate finance and ESG investing share the same goal to internalize the externality generated by climate change. The size of ESG investment in the global market is estimated to be about $41 trillion. It is far exceeding the climate finance estimate of about $6 billion. So plugging in ESG investment to PPP for climate projects could be activated when the preconditions are met. The key is whether NFP can contribute to easing entry barriers for private ESG investors. NFP could provide a risk-sharing scheme through information production, screening, monitoring of the climate projects. Regarding ENS pillar, measurement, reporting, and verification of the social cost benefit of a climate project is very important. And regarding the G pillar, mitigating the agent principle problem, that is the information asymmetry between ESG investors and project operators, is critical. So if NFP responds properly to the challenges mentioned above, NFP could contribute to taking a risk, reducing transaction cost, and sending a price signal to private ESG investors. Before concluding today's presentation, I want to quote Einstein's remarks. Climate change is the outcome of our economic activities and choices. To solve this problem, we must revise our perceptions, goals, and implementation strategies different from the past. The current size of climate finance is still significantly below compared to the required amount. We need to figure out new feasible approaches if we want a breakthrough leap. If we properly utilize an NFV, and we could successfully mobilize flows from private ESG investing, then who knows? And I would like to finalize my presentation here and be happy to address any comments you have. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ick Jin. Very, very interesting perspective and a well-rounded perspective, as you rightly mentioned, tripod for driving climate investments, NDCs, NFVs, and ESGs. I think without a doubt, I mean, we need to look at the public sector, the private sector, and the whole ecosystem around it. And I can tell you that GGI makes efforts at all three tripods that you spoke about to drive climate finance to all our member countries. We would come back with a brief summary also at the end of the presentations, at the end of the last presentation, and see if there are any questions for you. Thank you so much for your presentation. We would try once again, Ms. Andre, we have your presentation now. I'm quite sure this would work. We are ready for your presentation. Over to you.
Perfect. Thank you very much. So if you can go on the next slide, please. Thank you very much. I'm going to be presenting you the Green Finance Platform, which is actually a knowledge platform that provides market, policy, regulatory innovation, and news for the financial system to contribute to the transition toward a sustainable economy. If you go on the next slide, please. That's our theory of change. So basically, the rationale behind the development of the tools that we have on enabling environment for the financial system is based on the fact that we are calling for stringent regulations on sustainable finance, which is very much aligned with the need of bringing credibility and accountability to sustainable finance commitments and ESG claims. So what we're trying to do is to assess the double materiality in policy and to look at the impact on banks, investors, and issuers, so all the private finance institutions' impact on the environment. So basically what we're saying is that financial markets and flow are very important means to support climate pledges and SDGs. But the market as it is, and as well as all the market-led solutions by themselves, cannot shift the market towards sustainability activities, and you need to combine it with rule-based approach. You need to combine it with prescriptive and coercive policies to ensure that all the lending and investment are compliant with climate and environmental goals. If you go on the next slide, please. Thanks. So we developed a set of tools, again, to work on these enabling environments, and which is very much based on this rule-based approach of financial policies, on green financial policies. And we are presenting it here in a very progressive manner. So first is to develop a sustainable finance roadmap. So we have a sustainable finance diagnostic toolkit that we developed together with UNDP, and it's to develop a status report, which would be a first step into drafting a sustainable finance roadmap for a country. Then the idea is to align with global standards and best practices using the Green Finance Measures database. This can be used as a benchmarking tool and kind of benchmark your regulatory journey against your peers. Then the third step is to design effective green finance policy and regulation. And we have a tool that helps design effective green finance policy according to the objective, whether it's more financial stability or whether it's more challenging private finance flow towards the SDG. And then lastly, you can shape the global conversation, because ultimately the Green Finance Platform is very much of a sharing platform where you can share your knowledge and share your journey on green finance policies. So if you go on the next slide, thanks. So the first step, just back to this first step, so developing sustainable finance roadmap using the Sustainable Finance Diagnostic Toolkits. So the toolkit is a 10-step questionnaires that help countries, so policymakers, surface necessary information and measures to take a coordinated approach to the development of a national sustainable finance roadmap. So what we have with this toolkit is try to support policymakers to have an integrated approach to understanding the need of sustainable finance, but also starting with the pure definition of what sustainable finance is, depending on the industry, depending on the political economy. So what we're trying to do is to look beyond the technical barriers of accessing private finance and having an overview on sustainable finance, to have an understanding of all the institutional challenges in order to provide the adequate signals to drive the market adjustments through the 10 steps. So the rationale behind the toolkit is that while working with countries on capacity building that we've done in the past, what clearly emerges is that developed and developing economies have taken very different approaches to integrate green-related consideration into financial policy framework. So we kind of witnesses multiple ways of integrating environment and climate change challenges, and ultimately multiple ways of attracting private capital depending on the financial culture, depending on the political economy of the country, and depending on your institutional dynamics, depending on the remit of the central banks, etc. So it means that the starting points of the sustainable finance journey of countries can be very different, even if in the end, some of the conclusions they reach are quite similar. But the 10 steps of the toolkit really trying to address all this political economy and all the financing needs, the industry, the sectors, they need to be prioritized, what kind of finance they need depending on what they want to achieve, etc. So if you go on the next slide, please. So this toolkit, the Sustainable Finance Toolkit, is part of a GCF-funded project that we've been managing on the development and implementation of national sustainable finance roadmap in 6 countries that you have here. The main goal with the project is to catalyze national action, so to develop some sustainable finance roadmaps in those countries. But the long-term goal is really to build kind of international consensus on best practices and try to work on the interoperability of approaches, which is really critical given the current risk of market fragmentation in terms of green finance policy. And currently, together with my colleague Gayan, we are supporting Nigeria and Mongolia through capacity building activities. So if you see that they're very different sectorial and even financial focus, depending on the country. India, it's on micro SMEs, Mongolia, it's reporting guidance for listed companies. In Nigeria, we're working with central banks. But it was really, again, linked to the rationale of the toolkit, which is trying to identify exactly what kind of finance policy can be best tailored to launch a sustainable finance roadmap. So if you go on the next slide, please. So aside from pure capacity building activities, we've also, and that's the second step of this journey, we've mapped the regulatory green finance journey of 100 developed and developing economy using the Green Finance Measures database. So it's a global companion of 680 plus sustainable finance policies and regulations from 100 countries. And this tool really allows policymakers to benchmark the green finance regulatory landscape against their peers, and the ultimate goal is to replicate green finance standards and norms. So this benchmarking tool is really helping us to monitor the jurisdiction's sustainable finance strategic intervention, what is critical, and depending on a country, for instance, the issuance of sovereign green bonds, etc. And if you go on the next slide, that explain a bit deeper, how we develop this database. So the idea again is to map the significant acceleration in policy and regulatory action on green finance since 2015, so since the Paris Agreement. So we track the green finance regulatory journey of developed and developing economy, and we try to integrate into this database strong signal of the country's green finance competitiveness, like taxonomy, like sovereign green bond issuance, etc. So the database focuses on policies and regulatory measures implemented by public authorities, including governments, central banks, financial watchdogs, so regulators, legislators, and public financial institutions, so all the funds as well. But it's mainly from public institutions. So to give you an overview, if you go on the next slide, to give you an overview of the regulatory instrument, it goes from soft measures, so it can be speeches from a governor of central bank, because again, it's often a strong signal. It can be consultation, ESG guidelines for listed company, to more risk-based approach measures. So we have also microprudential stability measures, TCFD-related measures, fiduciary responsibility, which is key in to advance ESG investing. We have macroprudential stability measures as well. We are mapping the climate macro stress test. And what we did is that we categorized all the measures according to the 5 R's framework, so that we call the 5 R's of green finance, which is a framework for us to classify the green finance policy and regulation as per the objectives. So you have reallocation, raising of capital. That's all the measures that are more in the market shape rationale. So to promote the capital allocation to green sectors, it can be, again, green bonds, market standards and guidance, fiscal and monetary policy, and all the measures related to investing in green recovery, and of course, all the taxonomy that we'll discuss after. Then you have risk management. That's all the market-based measures that seek to reduce the personal information gaps that prevent the accurate pricing of climate-related financial risks, so transparency, scenario analysis, stress testing, etc. Then you have responsibility of institutions. That's all the measures that clarify the responsibilities of FIs with respect to environmental factors with capital markets, so fiduciary duty and investor governance, but also stewardship. Then you have reporting and disclosure, all the measures to strengthen flows of information relating to environmental factor within the financial system. So it can be corporate disclosure, but also financial institutions disclosures. And then strategic research, which is much more linked to a sustainable finance roadmap that we just discussed. That's really broad measures to align group of institutions or the financial system itself with environmental outcomes and sustainable development objectives. For instance, the EU Fit for 55 regulation, which also includes some accounting and industrial policies. So if you go on the next slide, please. So what's interesting currently and what's happening in terms of the sustainable finance measures is that over the past 2 years, we are experiencing a shift towards more prescriptive approach to green finance regulation that express the willingness of financial regulators to address the risk of misrepresentation and greenwashing, which is high on the agenda of some policymakers in developed economies. So of course, you have very jurisdictional cultures that vary, with some favoring a more rules-based approach than others, like the EU, showing that green finance regulation are rooted in very different concerns. It can be CSR, it can be only financial stability that we see in the US, for instance. But those approach really reflects the interest of different stakeholders looking at similar concerns through different lenses. And a case in point is green taxonomy, because again, it's looking at similar concerns, so challenging crowding private capital and trying to vary on financial markets, but through different lenses, which is often very political. But ultimately, all those regulatory reform will have huge effect on the global allocation of capital. And so there's a competition that a global standard race, set a race on sustainability related matters. And I just wanted to show you the example of taxonomies, which is a very highly normative approach to green regulation. So that's why I was talking about a shift. But it's a classification tool that aims to provide clarity and standardization to market participants. And now we have more than 20 classifications that are under development worldwide, with China and EU being kind of the pioneer in this global standard setting race. If you go on the next slide, please. And then I put the example of South Africa and Canada, Japan, because they included some transaction activity, which is again a good evidence that they all have their very different financial culture, all very different industry that they need to promote, also linked to government budgets. But what we see with Japan and Canada is that they try to coordinate finance for high emitting and high carbon assets. If you go on the next slide, please. So what we've done with this database and with the repository of all the taxonomy that we have is that we really wanted to capitalize on the data that we had and on the methodology that we developed to try to evaluate effectiveness, to clarify the objectives of green finance policies and assess the impact, whether it has been effective or not, to implement, for instance, a reporting framework or disclosure for corporates and non-financial institutions, etc. So we try to look at beyond conventional proper market functioning and financial stability targets of financial regulations. We wanted to look whether it has been effective in shaping the market towards green activities. So, and what's interesting is that currently there's a broad consensus among financial regulators that climate change and sustainability-related consideration needs to be integrated into the regulatory framework in addition to, again, traditional objectives. But in many jurisdictions, it is acknowledged that financial regulators and supervisors, including central banks, can address climate risk within their current financial stability mandate. But the issue really is no longer to involve, I think, financial watchdogs, so the legislator or the regulators, but it also to look at what they could do more, meaning to determine to what extent they should intervene, to clarify the objectives they should pursue, and to review the regulatory and supervisory tools which are available. So in May 2021, last year, the Green Finance Platform, together with Inspire Research Network and the Grantham Research Institute of LSE, we launched a Sustainable Finance Policy Effectiveness Working Group to assess how certain green finance measures are really influencing market behavior that has positive impact on the environment. So the focus of the policy work, if you go on the next slide, please. Thank you very much. So the focus of the policy work is to trying to look at incentives that have positive environmental impact, and using positive environmental impact purposely, and that have been helping to shift the business model towards green transition, driven by macroeconomic approach of the net zero transition. So the research is really oriented into the idea of double materiality that I've mentioned at the very beginning, to explore the double effectiveness of green financial measures. So the fact that climate change affects financial institutions, which is more risk-based approach of financial stability, proper market functioning with all the flows of information you're asking for disclosure or scenario analysis, etc. But also the fact that financial institutions themselves impact the climate system and so contribute to the risk they are managing, which is more the impact approach at the very below of the world. So the dependency of our exposure on climate and biodiversity, which is financial materiality, but also the impact on climate and biodiversity, which is environmental materiality, are assessed into this framework to try to, again, it will not give a judgment on whether a policy has been effective, but rather it will give you keys on how to design effective policy depending on your objectives. So if you go on the next slide. So that's the end of the green finance journey with the 3 tools. One, the sustainable finance toolkit, 2, the green finance measures database where you benchmark your regulatory journey, and so the design effective policy, and then that's about knowledge management and shaping the global conversation, which my colleague Gayon here is managing, which is all the communication and knowledge management of the Green Finance Platform. So our mission here and really the rationale is to increase awareness on ESG risk and opportunities for the global financial sector, but importantly, try to promote tools and knowledge that police the way the concept of green, sustainable finance, ESG are used by private FIs, relates to the theory of change. I've mentioned, the need to bring a bit of credibility, and you have many, we have, 36 here knowledge partners. We're joined by a number of leading financial think tanks, so Climate Policy Initiative, Carbon Tracker, CDP, etc., Action, that are really trying to bring some tools, some methodology to assess whether funds have been really much aligned with Paris Agreement, etc. And then if you go on the next slide, we have a stakeholder engagement that, again, my colleague Gayon here is leading to try to coordinate actions across financial regulators and supervisors. And the idea is to leverage the support to countries to embed environmental consideration in financial system, develop an assessment. So all the tools that we developed with the GFP, the communication, social media, the community of practice is really geared toward the public sectors. So if you go on the next slide, please. Thanks. So we have the GFP Twitter that we really encourage you to join. We have a sustainable finance discussion on the GGKP Green Forum. This is an open discussion where we share, news articles, but also news from countries on the, new policy, new regulation. It helps us monitor what is happening, but also we are feeding regularly with news this discussion. If you go on the next slide, please. Yes, so to briefly conclude, so we have a set of tools for and geared toward financial policymakers that goes from developing a sustainable finance status report, so first step, to policy design for effective green finance measures, through allowing policymakers to benchmark the green finance landscape against their peers and try to replicate best practice using the green finance measures database. And what we're trying to pitch for is to is an approach of sustainability with it's a very systemic challenge. And we're trying to calling for that calls, for unprecedented level of policy coordination involving multiple instruments. And the question of sustainable finance can no longer be only technical and can no longer be separated from the broader growth regime. And so we need fiscal, we need financial, but we also need monetary accounting policies to be complementary and cooperative. And so we need to work on international coordination, and that's the ultimate goal of the Green Finance Platform. I'll stop here. Thanks so much for your passion. Thanks so much, Gulshan, for the invitation, and happy to answer any of your questions.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Ms. Camille. Very, very interesting presentation. Of course, all the countries definitely needs the kind of tools that GGKP is trying to produce. Essentially, the one that you spoke about today certainly makes the financial or at least supports the financial architecture for sustainable economic transitions. Thanks so much for the presentations. I think we are okay on time. We can take one question for each of the panel members here. I'm looking for the participants here or participants online. If you have any questions for the panelists, you can shoot them now. If not, then probably I'll run through a question each with about a minute to respond. I'll wait for 10 seconds to see if any hands raised either online or here in the room. Okay. I'm looking at Mr. Tuguldur Bavai. So the question around NFV, certainly a very, very important tool to support the governments and truly a conduit of climate finance for the governments and market participants to come in and engage in mobilizing climate finance. The question to you really is, how do you scale this or take it to other countries in a manner which is acceptable to the governments? And I think you did stress upon a point on making it local, yeah, or adapting to the changing market conditions of the country. Do you think there are any standard frameworks that can reduce the implementation time of national financing vehicles, and what governments can adopt rather quickly? Over to you.
Thank you, Gulshan. I think there is no one answer to the question for every country, and there is a different circumstances, and probably there is a different model, and even this one model can change over time, depending on how the circumstances and the market changes in the country. And in the presentation we presented, and what we were using for the Mongolia Green Finance Corporation was the recommendations and the advice from the Green Investment Group. So the first UK-based green bank currently is a Green Investment Group acquired by Macquarie Group. And those I guess we can all use the same framework and the considerations, but ultimately it really depends on the readiness and the willingness of the local stakeholders and investors. And obviously in our case, we also learned that a champion that really advocates for the instrument is really instrumental in saving time and pitching the idea. That would be my response.
Surely, thank you. I cannot agree more. We really need somebody to hold the determination to see the project through or to set the NFV for the country. Thank you. The second question is for Genta, linked to private sector, GCF private sector facility. If you can throw some light, or if you have the answer around which private sector mitigation investments have been most effective and efficient at reducing emissions and achieving the highest private and social rates of return.
Thank you, Gulshan. This is not don't have the full question, a full answer on this, but this is a very pertinent question that we'll definitely will look into this a bit more specifically in the next evaluations that we are working on.
Yeah.
Thank you for shedding some light on this. But definitely there is, what I was going to say in relation to this, there is a lot of changes that need to happen within the GCF in order to increase the access of direct access entities, because what we're noticing now is that those that have been accredited are mostly development banks.
Yes.
So we really don't see the real, private sector projects or mitigation projects that you were referring to, and the real, change on the ground. And some of these projects as well, the mitigation ones, they are also multi-country program projects, which is also very difficult to really pinpoint the specific results and how they were achieved. So that would be my general question for now. Yeah.
Thank you. Sorry to interrupt. Just a comment that I'd like to make before I go to the next question is thank you for sharing the efforts that GCF is making. In your presentation, you did mention about roughly 1,000 days that an entity could take from getting accredited to writing proposals and others to finally see investment mobilizations, and that GCF is making so many efforts to make the process more rapid and more transparent, more efficient, more predictable, as you mentioned in your presentation. I think that's a very, very important aspect, and GGI makes all its efforts and works with GCF in supporting all the aspects of speed, transparency, efficiency, working with the direct access entities. In that pursuit, I also would like to just use this platform as an opportunity to state that through our Korea Green New Deal Fund, we are supporting Window 2, we are supporting GCF programs, concept notes that can see the finish line through the support of KGNDF, and we'll be working closely with GCF private sector facility as well to see some of the projects that we can support directly.
And let me also conclude by saying that I also had a chance firsthand to meet some of the GGI staff in the country level, because I conducted some country missions, and I really want to reiterate what you said. I think the partnership is very important, and I think your organization is really being instrumental in helping GCF achieving the climate results.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Jenta. And we could always have a follow-up meeting to see how we can support further. Thank you.
Thank you.
The question for Dr. Jin is about very, very important point on connecting the dots. But I think one of the key parts of your presentation really looked at how do we support the three buckets that you spoke about, the public safety net, the private safety net, and screening monitoring. So I think my question is around, in your analysis, do you consider risk at each stage and thus categorize grant, concessional loans, and other kind of financing instrument, guarantees, and others? And how do you bifurcate it into public finance, private finance, and the screening and monitoring process? Over to you.
Well, it's a big question. Well, I'm not sure I can answer directly your question, but I would like to address this point again. There are potential financial resources out there, and we could link them to climate finance field. The problem is that there are significant barriers to entry. From the perspective of a financial intermediation, there is a discrepancy between what private ESG investors want and what the climate finance project developers provide now. There are many factors, but I want to stress today that there's a need to improve the risk sharing scheme. It should be very flexible and comprehensive. And the starting point is to step away from focusing on the individual project level and move towards the portfolio level, consisting of several projects. then we could cope with many types of risks, and we could introduce a very comprehensive instrument. To this end, NFV is able to play a key role. As an economist who believes in the positive function of the market competition, I think that trying a new approach from a new perspective could achieve unexpectedly good results. That's my last remarks.
That's a brilliant remark, and I cannot agree more, to go more at the portfolio level where risks can be spread across different verticals and worked across at a portfolio level. Completely agree with you, and I can say that GDGI believes in that and works at the portfolio level, at the pipeline level, and really creates a funnel around the front runners and try to come up with instruments that would support our member countries in aggregating projects and making them more bankable in several sorts. So thank you so much, and completely agree with you on that. My last comment, more than a question, is this is a brilliant tool that GGKP has come up with, and I completely see the sustainable finance diagnostic tool and its effectiveness for all the member countries. I really believe that this can set the national sustainable finance roadmap with the kind of questions that are there. I've used the toolkit myself, and I'd encourage all the participants to have a look. Please visit GDKP website and have a look at the diagnostic toolkit. It's really cool. It definitely sets the countries to begin looking into their assessments, around green finance measures and the kind of green finance that they can get access to. So thank you so much for that presentation, Ms. Andre. With that, I think we come to a conclusion of this presentation. I really want to thank all the panelists for making time and sharing your views. Really interesting. And I hope all the participants had a good time, enjoyed the presentations. And if you have any questions, comments to make, please feel free to leave them here, or you can also reach out to any of the GDGI staff.